Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Hazem Sika. Well, the second anniversary of the uprising is less than 2 months away and there's still no end to the fighting in sight. With hundreds of people killed in Syria every day, opposition rebels want better weapons. There are reports the Syrian army has brought in reinforcements to central parts of the country. It's also launched an offensive to retake territory rebels have held for months. And despite significant advances by the rebels this week, the opposition is still outgunned by the Syrian army. The result, a deadlock. The opposition is concerned there isn't enough international support. And some members of the Syrian opposition coalition say promises to supply aid aren't being kept. Well, this week, a senior member of the Saudi royal family and former spy chief expressed alarm at the progress of what he called extremist elements in the Syrian opposition. Prince Turki al-Faisal, a brother of the current Saudi foreign minister, called for efforts to step up armed support for moderate Syrian rebel groups. He told the World Economic Forum in Davos 60,000 people have been killed already. Do we have to wait for double or triple that number to die before Assad leaves? What is needed are sophisticated, high-level weapons that can bring down planes and take out tanks at a distance. This is not getting through. You have to level the playing field. Most of the weapons the rebels have come from captured Syrian stocks and defectors bringing their weapons. Well, on Friday in Davos, King Abdullah of Jordan poured cold water on hopes of toppling Bashar al-Assad. This is what he had to say.
Anybody who's saying that Bashar's regime has got weeks to live really doesn't know the reality on the ground. They still have capability, I give them a strong showing, at least for the first half of 2013.
Well, for its part, Russia this week reiterated its position regarding the fate of Assad. Here's Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
The Syrian opposition is obsessed with the idea of eliminating Bashar al-Assad's regime. While they preserve this irreconcilable position, nothing good will happen.
Well, let's introduce our guests now. In London, Kamran Bokhari, Vice President for Middle Eastern and South Asian Affairs at Stratfor. In Beirut, we have Elias Hanna, a retired Lebanese army general. And joining me here in Doha, Louay Safi, member of the Syrian National Coalition. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Louay Safi, if I could start with you. What do you make, first of all, of the comments by the Saudi prince there, Turki al-Faisal?
Well, I agree with it. I think the opposition has not received enough support, definitely not to the level that the Syrian regime is receiving from its friends. So we hope that we see more forthcoming support, particularly in terms of high-quality weapons, meaning weapons that can deter aircrafts, the fighter jets, and some advanced weapons to destroy tanks. Unless we change the balance on the ground, I think the regime is not going to start changing the dynamics, will not budge to the demands that should stop killing the Syrian people.
Well, let me bring up a criticism that's been made of the Syrian opposition, which I'm sure you've heard, which is mainly twofold. First of all, one of the reasons given for the lack of any appetite for more outside intervention is the state of the opposition in Syria, specifically the fact that many of them are made up of these what are considered very unsavory jihadist extremist groups, and the reluctance to provide support to those groups. That's one element. How is your group dealing with that?
Well, I think we definitely have some small groups who tend to have narrow horizons and they have fanatical religious views. So we acknowledge that. But I think this fact has been exaggerated. They are a fringe group within the opposition. And there are some people...
But they have proven to be very effective on the battlefield.
Well, I mean, effective is another question. But that doesn't change the fact that within the mainstream opposition, they are very small fragments. And they cannot decide the direction of the revolution or the conflict.
Another criticism that's been made is of your group specifically, and what they say is that it remains disjointed. it is not united at the moment, and many people say it is ineffective, and that is part of the reluctance for other groups to get behind you more forcefully. What do you say to that?
We see these as excuses. The reality is the opposition has united itself greatly. Most of the political forces and revolutionary forces are united through the National Coalition and through the Joint Command inside the country in terms of military forces. So we see these as a smokescreen for those who have not, for one reason or the other, have not decided to give enough support to change the balance on the ground.
All right, let's talk more specifically then about the situation on the battlefield. Elias Hanna, as a military man yourself, you're aware of the comments that the Saudi Prince Turki al-Faisal said when he said that more effective weapons are needed. What sort of effect will the Syrian rebels, if they are able to get anti-tank weapons, weapons that can bring down planes, what sort of effect does that have on the battlefield? Is it a game changer for them?
I think, when we study the Syrian question today, there is the fault lines, there is some schism within the coalition that goes from the political. Within this coalition, you have different people with different political goals. Moreover, it goes to the ideological level. You have different parties of this coalition with different ideological doctrines. Moreover, and last but not least, when you go to the military level, you have a lot of problems of fault lines. On one side, you have the numbers of the rebels and the freedom of action with no real game changer as weapon. And I don't think that anti-tank weapon will be considered as a game changer. Moreover, this coalition with no unity of commands and versus a number well organized, the conventional army, the Syrian army, which is well equipped, well prepared for this case scenario, and that's why we have a stalemate. Now, a game changer will be political, I think. It's not at the military level. When the political level is really finding a solution, it goes directly to the military level. At this particular time in the Syrian crisis, we have what we call strategic paralysis. Strategic paralysis, nobody is going to interfere in Syria like overtly. Everybody is working by proxy. So that's why all the countries around, including Russia, including the United States of America, and by extension the EU and Russia, nobody is willing to interfere in Syria. So that's why the tactical level, as far as we go in time, the tactical level will really define the outcome in Syria. But so far, this tactical level is in the stalemate. So that's why I guess that it will go and trail for a longer period of time with more and more casualties at the civilian level.
Kamran Bokhari, any turning point that we may see in Syria will occur at the political level rather than military. You share that view?
I think I do share that view, because what we have is the sort of backdrop of previous scenarios of regime collapse. So you have the experience of Afghanistan, you have the experience of Libya, of Iraq. And when I mean experience, I mean the experience of those who can actually make a difference, i.e. the United States and the Europeans, and of course Russia as well. So there is a hesitance as to, even if we take out the al-Qaeda transnational jihadist factor, the sheer issue is that do you want to create another Libya-like situation in the heart of the Middle East? Syria, as Elias is saying, is on fault lines. There are sectarian fault lines, there are ideological fault lines. Syria is centered between what I call sort of the border between the Iranian-led sphere of influence and the Sunni Arab world. So this is a place where stakes are high and there is no effective replacement. And as we've been speaking, that the coalition or the rebel coalition is not coherent enough to step in. And so the question is, if you give tanks, anti-tank weapons, anti-aircraft weapons, the regime may come down. But then what next? How do you fill the vacuum? We're looking at a very long-term insurgency civil war much worse than what we're seeing right now.
It's a legitimate question, isn't it? What happens next, Louay Safi?
Well, I mean, let us take the point made by Elias that we need to have a political solution. Now, to have a political solution, the Assad regime must be willing to negotiate transition from this dictatorial rule into a democratic or semblance of democratic rule. But the Assad is not refusing to do that. He has not recognized the opposition, called them traitors and terrorists. And so the only way for him to change his mind is to change the balance on the ground. Our problem is, and that I think goes to both comments, our problems is that by prolonging this conflict, we are putting or setting the ground for the very fear that they are pointing out. More extremism, more chaos. The only way to end that is to support the revolutionary forces. And by the way, these are united today under one central command. General Salim Idris is now in charge. He is working very hard. The forces have been united greatly, but part of uniting them further is to give them support. I mean, we are put in this difficult situation that first deal with the extremists, get united, but we're not going to do anything until you do that. And when we do that, then we don't need the external board. So our problem is that we have been able to make all these ground, to cover all this ground by depending on ourselves. And the opposition has created a miracle because a year ago, I mean, this regime is one of the strongest regimes in the Middle East. And this regime has been brought to its knees. Of course, it's trying to provide a show of confidence and control, but I can tell you, gradually the power of that regime is being taken away.
But as far as your group, what assurances can you give to the Syrian people, to Syria's silent majority who are deeply worried right now about the destruction of the country and are still at this point undecided about whether to cast their lot with the regime or risk an unknown future with the rebels? And I go back to this point again, that what could happen post-Assad is very uncertain right now.
Well, what is certain is that the Assad is destroying the country and killing thousands of people every month. And that is certain. So those who are fearing that some problems will come afterward, they can see in front of their eyes massacres and most vicious killing, and they keep talking about the future and the fear of the future, which is quite amazing. Now, this is what I can tell you as a thing to assure the Syrian people. We have united the political oppositions. 80% of them are united under one umbrella organization. Yes, talking about fault lines. Yes, I mean, these umbrella organizations united all the spectrum, political spectrum, which is a good thing. You know, why should you think that everybody should be under one political ideology? Only the liberals or only the Islamists should be united under one umbrella. We have united everybody. For the task of transition, everybody has committed to a democratic, free Syria where you have multi-party system, you have elections, and you have civil rights. So the commitment is there. The military forces have been united under one command. Every province has its own council, and all of them follow one central command. So what more can we do? I think everybody who is repeating the same arguments are trying to give excuses to the main powers who don't want really to tip the balance toward the oppositions, fearing the unknown. But I think they should fear what they are watching today. Massacres taking place under our watching eyes. Millions of Arabs and Muslims are seeing that, and I think we have to change the dynamics.
Can I comment on the post-Assad?
Yes, go ahead, Elias
please?
Hanna.
Yes, the situation in Syria today will never have the same Syria. Okay. First, second, it is a la Lebanese situation or model. The situation or the political solution, I think, will be imposed on Syria from outside. And if you want to impose the situation, it's going to be like a catastrophic situation in Syria, which is not yet accepted by the world as well by the neighboring countries. Or when you have a consensus between the countries that are fighting by proxy. And if you analyze the situation, I mean, the strategic environment around Syria, You go to Jordan, it is reluctant to interfere in Syria directly. If you go to Turkey, you have the Kurdish problem as well as the Alevi problem. If you go to Lebanon, you have like a pro-Iranian or pro-Syrian government, which is, really protecting the soft belly of Syria. Now, I think that maybe what's happening in Iraq could be a game changer if it goes to a higher level. I mean, the Sunni movement in Iraq could change the situation after Iraq has been for a long period of time under the Iranian thumb. So this is the situation around it, and this is the situation inside Syria. And now you see that what's going to happen between between Obama of yesterday and today in his second term, and his promise to Medvedev about what's going to happen for the missile defense, missile shield in Europe. And then, is it going to be like something like a La Yalta situation, if I may say the word? So we have to wait and see. It's a long process.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of opinions on what is happening in Syria at the moment, and we're trying to reflect that. We've been putting this question on our Facebook page, and we're going to look at what some viewers have to say on Inside Syria this week. Roxanne says the initial uprising was a fight for democracy, but it's been swamped by Islamic fundamentalists. Edward thinks that the Free Syrian Army are terrorists because they kill civilians and refuse to talk with the government. They are not freedom fighters, they are crazy. Shahid says the problem is Iran's involvement that gives colour to sectarian conflict. The dictator must go and leave it up to people to decide. It's simple, step down and then talk, otherwise talk is meaningless. Some pretty forthright opinions there from some of our viewers on Facebook, and we want to do keep those comments coming in. But if we could just turn back to this discussion for a moment about what the future may hold in Syria. And again, the reluctance of many people outside of Syria to get involved in this is because when they look at Syria, and I put this question to you, Kamran Bokhari, they see a whole patchwork of different groups that are crossing sectarian and ethnic lines, and that is something that many people simply don't want to get involved in. Is that a big part of what's holding back any further international involvement in the country?
It is, and part of it has to do with the doctrinal shift in the United States in terms of moving away from deploying large number of troops on the ground, or what we call boots on the ground, to a more indirect intervention with the use of technology and special forces, as we saw in the case of Libya when the stalemate there was broken. But in Syria, the stakes are much, much higher. As you say, when people look out from the outside, they see a very messy situation. They can't make head and tail of it. That frightens a lot of people. Louay is right that the more you prolong this, the more it's going to become, it's breeding ground for extremism. So you have sort of a catch-22 situation where if this continues, ultimately it's a long slug between the two sides, and the regime will have a stalemate, but we'll also have much more extremism and radicalism. The problem is that if you start to push, there are two parts to this. One is that you arm the rebels so that you have what is being called the level playing field. That level playing field, the intent of those who would want that is to force the hand of the government and bring it to the negotiating table. So let's say that's done somehow, assuming we can do that. The question is that this is a regime that has basically engaged in sort of a zero-sum situation, that there is no formula that it could be acceptable to it, because ultimately, the Alawite dominated state is looking at not just becoming a political minority in the new setup in a coalition government. It's also fearful of retribution. So when the lives of people are at stake, they do desperate things. I mean, we have the same.
So it's a sense then that they have nowhere else to go.
They have nowhere else to go, and so in other words, is there a formula that can bring about, like a Lebanese model, if you will, the Taif Accords, or something that happened in Iraq that basically brought in a sort of semi-dysfunctional democracy, which is having its own problems, as Elias pointed out. But the question is, where is that formula going to come from? Is there such a formula where you can basically co-opt the government as well as the opposition into some sort of a power-sharing agreement?
Let's talk a little bit more then about the political side of this, Louay Safi. We've heard very little lately from Lakhdar Brahimi, the UN Arab League Special Envoy to Syria. Do you expect any new diplomatic initiatives from him for resolving this in the near future?
I don't think so. I think it's clear from the last statement made by Lakhdar Brahimi that he was displeased by the speech of Bashar Assad. He felt even betrayed because Assad sort of closed all possibilities for him to even negotiate a national coalition government. But it seems to me that at this point the opposition is not asking for boots on the ground, and really the only way for us to move ahead toward a better situation and more democratic government is to take al-Assad out of the picture. I think the one who is obsessed with al-Assad is the Russians and the Iranians, because they both know that he is a dictator, and without him his regime would fall. The whole regime is standing on him, and he has complete control over it. But the situation cannot continue like that. I mean, there's no return. The only thing that will happen is more killing, and I think everybody will have to take responsibility for allowing that to happen. We have a solution. The solution is we are willing to negotiate with people within the regime itself, away from the Assad and his security chiefs. Let us have a transitional government. We are willing to talk to the Alawites. The opposition is not heading a sectarian war, and despite all the provocations by the regime, still the opposition has not taken any sectarian posture, did not attack villages or cities where there is a majority Alawites. We have Alawites in our opposition organizations. So I think the only way for us to solve the problem is to take away the ability of Assad to manipulate the situation. And I agree that requires some sort of international agreement. I think the Americans must take more serious the issue of settling the conflict politically. We feel that laid back and entertaining fears that I think they exaggerated and not real.
Well, you mentioned Iran a little earlier. Let's talk a little bit more about Iran now. I want to put this to Elias Hanna. The comments earlier this week by a senior aide to the Iranian government, essentially saying that any attack on Syria by outside forces would represent an attack on Iran. Now, that's not entirely surprising, but certainly the most forceful comments that we've heard from the Iranian government at this level. What do you make of that?
Today, I mean, in this situation in the Middle East, this is a time for Iran to reap the benefit of this vacuum in the region and to be really a major player or regional player, having the capability to project power all over the region, especially when we have this Arab Spring that is turning into, like a winter or bloody spring. Now, Syria is the linchpin in the region for Iran, as well as by extension to Lebanon. And it's a message for everybody. And Iran, I think, knows that nobody will interfere in Syria because everybody is following what we call a low-cost strategy in Syria, letting Syria to fall from within, a war of attrition to a certain level, when everybody is really fatigued or weared up in order to go to the table, which is not the case today.
All right, that's going to have to be the last word. I want to thank all three of our guests. Kamran Bokhari in London, and in Beirut, Elias Hanna, and here in the studio with me in Doha, Louay Safi. Thanks very much for your time. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this program, but our on-the-hour news bulletins and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks for watching. The latest news is up next. Stay with us.